an accused pedophile priest counseled by a psychiatrist who may have been a serial pedophile
Widespread
himself.
child sex abuse in the Catholic Church.
Brutal rape when she was a teenager by a Catholic priest, Jared Mulvale.
Sex abuse in the Catholic Church has quit, citing
Over
resistance
50
within the Vatican.
priests committed horrendous acts upon hundreds of children.
The Catholic Church is facing scandals and being forced to pay millions of dollars.
In the 1980s and 90s, the press reported crimes that seemed inconceivable.
Sins of the fathers.
Case after case of alleged sexual misconduct.
Committed by Catholic priests and covered up by bishops.
The bishop was warned about Cost's behavior, but kept moving him around.
In 2002, revelations reached a crescendo.
Sparked by the release of thousands of pages of documents.
You are a filthy pig.
Responding to the crisis, America's bishops enacted reforms and made a promise.
To bring an end to sexual abuse in the church.
More than a decade later, new disclosures continue to make headlines. Some priests have faced consequences, but what about the bishops who covered up their crimes?
"39-year-old Father Gilbert Gothay has admitted that he sexually abused at least 35 boys.
In 1985, the first case of a priest accused of sexual abuse to get major media attention came from the small town of Henry, Louisiana. Nearly as shocking as the charges was the fact that church leaders had heard allegations for years.
In sworn statements, the head of the local diocese, Bishop Jared Fry, has admitted learning about a child molestation involving Father Gothay 10 years ago.
An article about the Gothay case caught the attention of Barbara Blaine, a devout Catholic who says she had been abused starting at age 13 by her parish priest, Father Chet Warren.
That abuse was happening during the time that I was growing up and discovering who I am as a person. So the whole coloring of my psyche was that I was evil and made this good holy priest sin.
At age 29, Barbara reported Father Warren to officials in her diocese, all the way up to the bishop. But over the next few years, her frustration grew as Warren remained in ministry.
Those church officials were clearly not helping. They were only making matters worse for me. And so I thought, I'll just find some other victims. We can research this and educate ourselves, and we'll figure this out.
Although Warren has denied wrongdoing, 7 more women would make allegations against him before he was suspended from ministry in 1993. By that time, Barbara Blaine's network of victims had grown into the hundreds and taken the name SNAP.
Survivors Network for those abused by priests.
As you were.
Exactly. In the early to mid-90s, the way our movement grew was by these talk shows. Every time one of the shows aired, more victims would contact us.
How the Catholic Church kept these confessions silent for so long, despite reports from 3 states.
As more scandals broke, it became clear the problem was often not just crime, but cover-up.
Every bishop is the ruler of his own diocese and reports only directly to the Pope. And so every bishop was following his own policy. Some were more proactive, some were completely negligent, and some were criminal in that they were covering up known abusers and failing to report them to law enforcement.
When people come forward to the bishops to tell them about how they've been abused, it's more like, well, call my attorney.
And SNAP encouraged people contacting lawyers, people contacting prosecutors. Above all, their aim was to get potential molesters out of ministry.
It was a task made more difficult by the fact that the church's monetary settlements usually came with confidentiality agreements.
That prevented anyone ever knowing how bad it was inside the church, which is what they were just trying to prevent the secrets from getting out.
As a young priest at the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C., Thomas Doyle had co-authored a report in 1985 that warned sexual abuse cases were probably the single most serious and far-reaching problem facing our church today. And that was nearly 17 years before the earthquake that hit Boston in early 2002.
John Gagan is accused of molesting and raping boys as young as 4 years old over a period of 34 years. But documents uncovered by the Boston Globe suggest church officials covered up Gagan's crimes.
The documents showed that there were people trying to alert high church officials and were often just ignored.
What's more, Father Gagan and other accused priests had been protected by Boston's Cardinal Bernard Law, once called the most powerful Catholic in America. By the time the U.S. bishops arrived in Dallas for their annual spring assembly, they faced media scrutiny like never before.
A 3-month investigation by the Dallas Morning News reports nearly 2/3 of bishops protected priests accused of sexual abuse and allowed them to keep working over the past several decades.
The leaders of the church devoted their entire agenda to the sex abuse crisis.
There was really no other topic that was worthy of our attention.
The church is lucky to have had Bishop Wilton Gregory leading the bishops at that moment. He got it.
The bishops deliberated over a set of reforms that would go further than any they had passed to date. It would be dubbed the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, and it generated heated debate.
It was controversial for the bishops to say, we must report to law enforcement.
I have gotten plenty of letters accusing priests with no reasonableness at all.
It was controversial for them to say zero tolerance.
We have to come to a standard not of zero tolerance, but a standard of forgiveness.
And not every bishop agreed with every jot and tittle, but we did agree that we would do it and we would do it together.
The final charter included a zero-tolerance policy, a promise to report to public authorities allegations of sexual abuse of minors, and a commitment to transparency and openness.
239 yes, 13 no, no abstentions. The action item passes.
To ensure that dioceses implemented the new policies, Bishop Gregory appointed a National Review Board made up of lay Catholics and chaired by Oklahoma's governor, Frank Keating.
We were not just a showboat. We were not a bunch of Catholics selected to try to cover up and to avoid.
Arguably, they are obstructing justice, or arguably they also are accessories to the crime.
An investigation at a renowned Catholic choir school in Germany has uncovered hundreds of cases of physical and sexual abuse spanning decades.
49 people are blamed for the abuse, which started in 1945 and is believed to have ended just 2 years ago. The diocese acknowledges mistakes were made, which is why it commissioned the independent investigation.
In der Vorschule der Domspatzen in Ettelshausen und in
Preschool victims of the Regensburg Cathedral Sparrows described the institution as a prison, hell, and a concentration camp. Many of them called the time there the worst of their lives, marked by violence, fear, and helplessness.
Well, the allegations began to surface back in 2010. The school's members toured all over the world to perform.
Recently on Hawaii News Now, an accused pedophile priest counseled by a psychiatrist who may have been a serial pedophile himself.
That's one of several stunning new details in our investigation into the Catholic Church sex scandal. We've learned at least 18 schools and churches in Hawaii had teachers or clergy accused of preying on children.
63 people have filed lawsuits. Keoki Kerr is live at St. Anthony's in Kailua. Keoki, which institutions face the most allegations?
Keahi, we have learned that St. Anthony's has the dubious distinction of being the church in Hawaii with the most allegations of sexual abuse, as well as the priests accused by the most people of sexual abuse against boys here decades ago.
St. Anthony Church in Kailua and Damien Memorial School in Kalihi have the highest number of sexual abuse allegations in lawsuits, 21 each from the 1950s through the 1980s.
When I was about 8 or 9 years old, Father Henry raped me, and it was very violent and it was very intense.
The priest accused most frequently is the late Father Joseph Henry. 18 men have alleged in lawsuits he molested them over a 20-year period, most of those incidents at St. Anthony's. Alleged abuse victims, including former altar boys, say Henry and other priests there would sometimes give them money from the collection plates after having sex with them. This building on church grounds, where some of the alleged assaults took place, was named after Henry, but in October, St. Anthony's removed the plaque with his name on it out of respect for the abuse victims. Lawsuits also reveal that Brother Robert Bruillet, a religion and history teacher at Damien, was accused of abuse in 7 cases between 1972 and 1987. And Father James Jackson allegedly assaulted boys in 5 cases over a period of 26 years at St. Anthony Church and Maryknoll School. One lawsuit says Jackson underwent at least 10 years of treatment for his sexual interest in young boys with Dr. Robert Brown, the psychiatrist who himself has been accused of being a pedophile. About 30 men, nearly all of them Kamehameha School students, have sued, saying Brown sexually abused them.
It sounds like they were clueless. Sending pedophilia priest to a pedophile for what? Conversation? You know, trading tips? I mean, it's insane. It's actually depressing.
Father Joseph Ferrario was accused of sexually abusing boys in 5 cases between 1969 and 1981, most of them at St. Anthony Church. All of the alleged incidents happened before Ferrario became bishop, when he headed the Catholic Church in Hawaii starting in 1982. Sources say the Archdiocese and some Catholic schools expect to spend about $20 million to settle the abuse lawsuits.
I hope that these settlements will prompt more victims and witnesses and whistleblowers to come forward and get help and expose predators and protect kids.
We've compiled a list of the accused priests and others, as well as how many accusations are against each of them and where the alleged abuse took place, which schools and which churches. We put all of that on our website at hawaiinewsnow.com.
But in the months that followed, Keating found some church leaders still clung to secrecy. In Los Angeles, home to the largest archdiocese in America, Cardinal Roger Mahoney was fighting a pitched legal battle. to keep personnel records of accused priests out of the hands of prosecutors.
The DA at the time in Los Angeles called me, who was a Catholic, by the way, and he said, I need your help because they're shutting us off. They're not giving us access to anything. I said, what? I mean, there ought to be transparency. That's what the bishops want. But that was not the behavior of some of the bishops, which, quite truthfully for me as a Catholic layman, was stunning and unforgivable.
In frustration, Keating spoke out in the press, comparing some members of the church hierarchy to La Cosa Nostra. Facing threats of his ouster, Keating resigned, but says he made a parting request of Bishop Gregory.
That you all will continue what you are doing to address these problems, clean them up, and make sure that you drive a stake through the heart of that misbehavior. That you drive a stake through the heart, stake through the heart, stake through the heart, stake through.
Hearings have begun in Australia into allegations of widespread child sex abuse in the Catholic Church between 1950 and 2010. Data released by a commission investigating the claims suggests 7% of priests working in the country in that period were accused of child sex crimes, but few were pursued.
Children were ignored or worse, punished. Allegations were not investigated. Priests and religious were moved. The parishes or communities to which they were moved knew nothing of their past. Documents were not kept or they were destroyed. Secrecy prevailed, as did cover-ups.
The Vatican has been keeping a close eye on proceedings. Pope Francis's top financial advisor, Cardinal George Pell, who was formerly Australia's most senior Catholic, has testified at previous hearings.
For decades, allegations of covering up sexual abuse within the Australian Catholic Church have dogged him. But it never stopped George Pell from rising through the ranks to become one of the Vatican's most powerful. But now the 76-year-old cardinal himself has been charged with multiple sexual assault offences, the result of a 2-year investigation, sending shockwaves through the Vatican and around the world, police offering few details.
Today, Victoria Police have charged Cardinal George Pell with historical sexual assault offences. Cardinal Pell has been charged on summons and he's required to appear at the Melbourne Magistrates Court on the 18th of July. Cardinal Pell is facing multiple charges in respect to historic sexual offences, and there are multiple complainants.
Cardinal Pell is one of Pope Francis's top advisors. As the Secretariat of the Economy, he is in charge of the Vatican's finances. He was also handpicked to sit on the Pope's 8-member advisory council, set up to address issues including sexual abuse within the Church. Reading a statement from the Vatican just hours after the charges were laid, Cardinal Pell says he has endured a relentless character assassination and that he is innocent.
I'm looking forward finally to having my day in court. I'm innocent of these charges. They are false. The whole idea of sexual abuse is abhorrent to me.
Last year, Cardinal Pell refused to return to Australia to testify before a royal commission into the Church's mishandling of sexual abuse.
I regret that I didn't do more at that stage.
Instead, he gave 4 days of testimony from a hotel in Rome, his doctors claiming he was too ill to fly. Survivors of sexual abuse at the hands of clergy overseen by Pell were angered by his answers that they felt showed a lack of understanding and empathy. This will be a monumental test for Pope Francis, who up until now has stood by the Cardinal. There is no extradition treaty between Australia and the Vatican. However, the Pope has given Cardinal Pell a leave of absence to return to Australia to defend himself.
As Catholics, we hang our heads in shame.
In Australia, a high-level royal commission has revealed the scale of child sex abuse by Catholic priests. It's the first time ever that the country's Catholic Church has acknowledged the extent of the problem. The commission found that over the past 35 years, 4,444 victims have come forward to allege some form of child sexual abuse. Those victims identified 1,880 male and female perpetrators, including priests, religious sisters, and religious brothers, plus another 500 people unidentified. Much of the evidence, the commission says, is anecdotal. No word on any criminal charges, but the inquiry continues. Francis Sullivan heads the Catholic Church's Truth, Justice and Healing Council, which assisted the Royal Commission, and he says it's time for the Church to put the issue to the forefront.
People in positions of privilege covered it up. They were more interested in protecting the image of the Catholic Church than they were in protecting children and believing victims.
The commission reported that over a 60-year period, 7% of priests were alleged perpetrators. A report commissioned by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops found that over the same time period, 5.6% of priests in the U.S. had been accused of abuse. The Vatican formed a commission in 2014 to investigate claims of priest abuse, and so far the Vatican has not officially commented on the Australian commission.
23 years ago, Eileen Piper lost her daughter Stephanie to suicide. Stephanie had the year before made a complaint of brutal rape when she was a teenager by a Catholic priest, Gerard Mulvale. She complained to the church and to police.
It's been alleged by Stephanie that you fondled her breasts in the sacristy. What do you say with that? I deny that.
Police charged Mulvale on the strength of Stephanie's complaint, but she died before it came to court. He was later convicted of sex crimes against 2 teenage boys in her friendship circle.
The court heard Mulvale acted out of lust and self-gratification.
But from its initial investigation in 1993, the Catholic Church has never believed either Stephanie Piper or her mother Eileen. Eileen Piper is now 92 years old, and she's still trying to get an apology and some compensation for what was done to her daughter and how it left her.
It destroys your faith in the Catholic Church. They're there as a beacon of right from wrong. But to me, it's manufactured. There's nothing really deeply genuine about it all.
Where is the Christian empathy that is portrayed by the church? How my client feels is they're just waiting for me to die and go away. But she says, I'm not going to go away. I'll fight as long as I need to fight.
Eileen Piper's fight represents the top and the tail of the Catholic Church's history of dealing with child sexual abuse complaints. Today, it culminated with a groundbreaking report by the Child Abuse Royal Commission, which demonstrated for the first time the breathtaking numbers of children betrayed by the Church.
Between January 1980 and February 2015, 4,444 people alleged incidents of child sexual abuse.
It found a shocking 7% of priests had sexual abuse complaints against them. Pope Francis had previously estimated the worldwide percentage of paedophile priests at 2%.
absolutely staggering, huge numbers, and this is what's happened to children. They say victims, but they were children. They were all young children, like our children.
The scars of abuse left Anthony and Chrissy Foster's daughters, Emma, dead from a drug overdose, and Katie permanently disabled in a car accident. The Archdiocese of Melbourne, where the Foster girls and Stephanie Piper were abused, had the most priests who had claims against them. 70 men of the cloth were accused of sexually harming children between 1950 and 2010. That's 8.1%. Across the country, the statistics for religious brothers were even more alarming.
22% of Christian brothers were alleged perpetrators. 40.4% of St John of God brothers were alleged perpetrators.
These numbers are shocking. They are tragic and they are indefensible.
Francis Sullivan from the Church's Truth, Justice and Healing Council struggled to fight back tears during his speech.
I don't want to make this about me. It's not about me. It's about people who've been abused by people who should never, ever done it. It's pretty profound. And for me, the most shocking day was when all those figures tumbled together and you realised the extent of the abuse and the hypocrisy. You know, I'm a Catholic. I actually believe in the show.
Still.
And that's pretty profound when you have to stand there and face what is such a hypocritical history.
The stories of Eileen Piper and others gathered here today suggest that there is still a gulf between what Francis Sullivan says and what the clergy he represents are still doing to survivors and their families. Survivor Paul Levy came to the Commission on behalf of his friend, who is dying after his third liver transplant, after he wrecked his body with alcohol to dull the painful memories of child abuse, but is struggling to get the Salesians order to help him.
I gave Francis Sullivan from Truth, Justice and Healing a letter to say that he was dying, and if he had any meaning in what he said today, he needs to contact Russell Peter Clark today.
There's no doubt that the culture of the church is very slow to change. The church is actually inadequate in investigating its own abuse cases.
This was on a pilgrimage too.
Eileen Piper made a submission to the 3-week hearing, which began today, into the way that the Catholic Church handles abuse. Her submission tells of a sorry saga. The Church's Melbourne response did not uphold Eileen's complaint because it was later revealed a key witness was pressured by the Church to make a false statement against Stephanie. Despite that, the Melbourne Archdiocese to this very day stands by its original decision that Stephanie wasn't abused.
This one was taken at Cape Shine.
It has recently refused to return old documents to Eileen. They included her daughter's suicide note.
I won't give up. I will never give up on telling the Church how unfair, how sad it was. It's a wound that won't heal until I can get justice for Stephanie. I hope I can live long enough to do that.
Years
years of accusations, decades of abuse, and one unprecedented investigation. In November 2009, Ireland's Murphy Report exposed the extent of one of the worst scandals ever to hit the Catholic Church. The report found the Archdiocese of Dublin covered up widespread sexual abuse of children, and instead of punishing the offenders, bishops protected paedophile priests by moving them from parish to parish, and even sending them to the United States.
The Irish Church goes way back, obviously, to St. Patrick. And, you know, being one of the strongest Catholic countries in the world, Ireland was able, over the years, to export well over 4,000 priests to the United States. And some of them did wonderful work, but a good percentage of them, the clergy that came to the United States from Ireland, went on to abuse children.
I have a brother who was a priest in the United States. My uncle was a priest in the United States. They were ordinary people who went with a one-way ticket. And that style was replicated in dioceses all over the United States. And until 1970, half of the priests of Los Angeles were Irish.
There were a number of things going on. The American Church was in real need to have priests, because you can't operate a diocese, you can't operate these parishes without a priest. So they were willing to go out and give guys second and third and fourth chances. What's also going on is there is code language within the church that is just understood. A priest can be given a good bill of health on paper, but the communication still happens that watch out for this particular guy. He needs to be put with a senior priest to help him grow as a priest.
But, as the Murphy Report shows, priests who had abused in Ireland were sometimes given glowing reviews.
I cannot comment on an individual letter that was sent by an individual person to some other individual, but I can tell you that the same values that we are teaching to our seminarians today are based on what Christ taught us. It is a message of love. It's not a message of what can you get away with.
Many of the priests who became paedophiles were first abused themselves, like Father Oliver O'Grady.
How old were you when that priest abused you?
12. And that would be a guess. I was an altar server. I think what makes me sad is that I didn't develop a better, more mature way of understanding and relating to sexuality.
From the data that's available and from the different counselors I've talked to who specifically had priests loads that they counseled over the years, the vast majority of the guys, their first sexual experience was in seminary with a faculty member. And that completely changes the trajectory of a person's development, of their sexual development, their psychological development, their spiritual development. So as that priest is coming through spiritual direction and he's maturing as a human being and he's coming through the Catholic seminary system, there's that secret that's always there, that's deep there and never dealt with. It means that they basically have a stilted or stunted maturation age. They could have a chronological age of 50, but a maturation age of 15 or 16. And thus, they're attracted to that particular age group.
Like Father Brendan Smith, who was sent to Providence, Rhode Island, after he abused several boys and girls in Ireland. The Diocese of Providence was not told of his past. That's where he met Helen McGonigal when she was only 6 years old.
Our bishop at the time, Bishop McVinney, was of Irish ancestry, and he expressed a need for priests because they had a shortage. and that's how Brendan Smith got sent over. So, and then with Smith being from Ireland, my family being of Irish descent, it was a natural fit for him. I mean, at the moment that the first memory surfaced of actual abuse itself, I was just trying to think and relax and settle down, and that's when it hit me. I've been abused in every way imaginable.
Memories of sodomy, rape, repeated abuse suffered by Helen and her older sister, who eventually committed suicide.
Convicted on 117 counts in Ireland. They've called him the devil. They've called him the Antichrist over there, yeah. And one wonders what consumed him. I mean, if you were to take his photographs over time and see how he developed from, at first, being someone that a child might want to turn to. He had a nice face, he had an Irish brogue, he had a way about him that could be playful. But over time through his life, I see in the eyes a stone-cold stare that just to me looks as if he was consumed by evil.
When asked to comment, the Catholic Church in Providence sent us this statement. Presently, the Diocese of Providence is defending 2 lawsuits involving allegations surrounding abuse by Father Smith, including a lawsuit brought by Helen McGonigal. In light of this pending litigation, the Diocese of Providence will reserve any additional comments for the appropriate forum. And for the head of Ireland's church, new humiliating confessions.
The Church in Ireland must acknowledge before the Lord and others the serious sins committed against defenceless children.
Cardinal Sean Brady admits he took part in an internal church inquiry of Father Brendan Smith in 1975, where 2 children were forced to take a vow of silence. Critics call for him to resign, but he says he was only taking notes.
It's the pattern, and it can tell any prosecutor, any judge across the world that this is how the church operates. The lesson has been, both from the Middle Ages when you go back into the documents, and from the experiences in the 1950s and 1960s. Ultimately, if the psychic infirmity exists in that priest, he's not going to be able to stop himself.
One of those priests, 82-year-old Father Francis Markey, was just arrested in South Bend, Indiana, 30 years after he was sent from Ireland to a church-run treatment center for clerical sex abusers in America.
Francis had abused several times in Ireland, and he's in treatment, and then for some odd reason at that point, they turned Francis loose. He found his way to several places that are completely unexplainable. They got him to a small little place where no one would have any idea, and he would be accepted.
Father Markey will soon be extradited to face charges that 40 years ago he raped a young boy in Ireland just after his father's funeral. And allegations are also surfacing in parishes he briefly passed through in the United States.
He didn't rape me, but what he did, he wanted to, he was attempting it, and I assumed that he had been in jail and likely had died, and I was very surprised to see he had just been arrested recently and still denying basically everything. How did he evade justice that long? Who helped him?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Mass, the first Mass of the day on Ash Wednesday.
How many children were abused? Thousands. Thousands and thousands of them. Going back You know, going back centuries. A priest appointed by the Archdiocese, who they knew had abused in at least 2 other parishes before. They sent him here under the blind stupidity or idiocy, thinking that it wouldn't happen again. And it did. And in doing that, they endangered every single solitary young guy in this parish. To know that the church knew about it and was just moving people on from A to B and not telling anyone in this community that they were sending a known child rapist to them as their priest. And that's the hardest probably for the people here in the pews to cope with.
It was Archbishop Martin who released 70,000 sealed files and fully cooperated with Judge Murphy's inquest. This week he dropped another bombshell, publicly calling for the secrets to be opened in every diocese in Ireland.
And bring the thing into the open. I think there's, you know, the openness with which people can now talk about the sexual abuse of children is a very important thing, and it's probably done a huge amount of good in the church and in society in general. Thank you.
We have an archbishop in Dublin who is doing things right. He has put in proper child protection measures. The problem is the other 25 bishops in Ireland have no time for him, because as far as they're concerned, he's betraying the church. The Vatican itself at one stage said this is an Irish problem, and I know because we exported priests to America, there seems to be more Irish priests who are abusers. But we're now seeing it coming up in Brazil and Germany and other countries. Some country has to be the first one to pull away the veil and show what's been going on.
Today is a very historic day for the Catholics of Ireland. Pope Benedict has written a pastoral letter to express his closeness to us at this challenging time. The first group he addresses are the victims of abuse. Pope Benedict acknowledges that when many survivors were courageous enough to speak of what happened to them, no one would listen. To us bishops, he says, we must admit that grave errors of judgment were made and failures of leadership occurred. The Holy Father offers very stern words to priests and religious who have abused children. Openly acknowledge your guilt, he says. Submit yourselves to the demands of justice, but do not despair of God's mercy.
This is my body, which will be given up for all of you.
Over the altar behind us there's a mosaic of a pelican. The myth of the pelican is it will take flesh from itself to feed its young. It's an image of Christ, the sacrifice of Christ for the people he loved. And that's the model of church we should have. A crow will, to protect itself, when food or resources are scarce, it'll eat the young of its own species. Our church has sacrificed its young, it has sacrificed its parishes, and appears almost to be prepared to sacrifice anything so that the institution is protected. So the model we have is not the pelican, it's a big black crow.
The cover-up by the church is horrendous. The sexual morality put forward by the church, and the Irish church specifically, was horrible. But we're getting free now, because we're finding out the truth, we're finding out the whole story, And there shouldn't be any fear in that, because at the end of the day, there's a great, tremendous, powerful culture and a tremendous
In the ensuing years, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has commissioned studies revealing that since 1950, some 17,000 minors have reportedly been sexually abused by over 6,000 clergy. Wilton Gregory insists that the reforms passed in 2002 have made the church safer.
Dioceses now have in place programs that are intended to protect children. We have protocols that our clergy are required to follow. That's good progress.
Of course, the church is safer today because so many of the victims have been speaking up and exposing predators.
But Blaine and others contend there's a basic issue that still has not been addressed: accountability for bishops.
The people who are in positions of authority who allowed this to go on and who have covered up the sex crimes are still in those positions.
The bottom line is that there are consequences for priests who abuse. There are no consequences, or there have been none, from the Vatican for bishops who have in any way enabled that abuse.
Case in point, Kansas City Bishop Robert Finn. Although he was convicted in court for failing to report a priest who took pornographic photos of young girls, Finn is still bishop today. And even Cardinal Bernard Law, who resigned as head of the Boston Archdiocese after mishandling sex abuse cases, went on to preside over one of Rome's most important churches and remained on a Vatican committee that handled cases of sexual abuse.
Some people said, gee, what a relief for him. He didn't have to clean up the mess he made. He got to move on to Rome.
To date, sex abuse cases have cost the church and its insurers over $3 billion. But especially since 2002, victims have also pressed for the church to turn over its files on accused molesters. In early 2013, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles released thousands of pages, revealing that in the 1980s, Cardinal Mahoney and a top aide tried to shield admitted sex abusers from law enforcement.
This was clearly a cover-up on the part of Mahoney. This was shocking material.
Since then, thousands more newly released documents have revealed alleged sex crimes and cover-ups, mostly decades old, in Milwaukee, the Twin Cities, Joliet, and Chicago. Pope Francis has promised a new committee will advise him on how to deal with what he's called the shame of the church. For Wilton Gregory, the prolonged struggle to put this crisis in the past brings to mind a teaching of Niccolò Machiavelli.
If a leader is going to give away 1,000 ducats, he should do it 1 ducat at a time, because people forget. But if he has to slay 1,000 soldiers, he should do it in 1 night, because people forget. The constant revelation, the continual disclosure of bad criminal behavior keeps this issue alive. And it's as though it's a never-ending drama.
Barbara Blaine is hoping people won't forget. When a United Nations panel in Switzerland recently subjected Vatican officials to an unprecedented full day of questioning, Blaine was there, with questions of her own.
Number one is, are they turning the evidence of sex crimes over to the police? And number two, are they punishing any of the bishops who have enabled and covered up for the sexual predators? If they would do either of those two things, that would give me hope that children will be protected in our church. But they failed to do either one.